To live alone without a man is more than a circumstance, it is a psychological statement. Jung understood that solitude, particularly for women, has always carried layers of projection from society, from tradition, and from the collective, unconscious. A woman who lives alone often becomes a symbol in the eyes of others. Some see her as independent and free. Others judge her as incomplete or isolated. Yet beneath these projections lies the deeper truth. Solitude can be one of the greatest crucibles of individuation. For when a woman chooses to live by herself, she is confronted not with emptiness, but with her own depths. She meets the self, unmediated by the constant demands of relationship, and in this encounter, she discovers strength, creativity, and wholeness. In this lecture, we will explore the archetypal and psychological truths about women who live alone, their struggles, their gifts, and the profound path of self-realization that often unfolds in solitude. Solitude as a path to individuation. And inner wholeness has always been a theme that carries both fear and fascination. For many, solitude is viewed as an absence, as something lacking companionship, intimacy, or social validation. But in Jung's psychology, solitude is not absence, it is presence, the presence of the self. It is the condition that allows an individual to turn inward and face what has been hidden, repressed, or ignored beneath the noise of daily life and the demands of others. When a woman chooses to live alone, free from the constant reflection of herself in a partner, she steps into a space that is both liberating and terrifying, a space where the journey toward individuation, the process of becoming her true whole self, can unfold with clarity. In solitude, the masks of compliance fall away, and what emerges is the unmediated encounter with her inner world, an encounter that is necessary for the birth of wholeness. Individuation is the central concept. In Jungian thought, the process by which the unconscious and conscious elements of the psyche are integrated into harmony. It is not about becoming someone new, but about uncovering and reconciling all the parts of oneself that have been divided or disowned. Solitude creates the conditions for this process because it removes distractions and external validations that often keep people from facing themselves. When alone, a woman no longer defines herself through the expectations of a partner, the approval of family, or the gaze of society. She is forced instead to ask deeper questions. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I value when no one is telling me what I should value? What parts of myself have I silenced for the sake of belonging? These questions do not have easy answers. But solitude provides the silence and space necessary to begin listening. At first, solitude can feel like emptiness, because the external anchors of identity have been stripped away. A woman who has long been defined by roles, wife, mother, partner, suddenly confronts the absence of those roles, and with it, the unsettling question of selfhood. Yet it is precisely in this emptiness that the psyche begins to stir. The unconscious, long overshadowed by the needs of others, begins to speak more loudly. Dreams become more vivid, emotions rise to the surface, memories return with intensity. All of these are signals that the deeper self is making itself known. Jung described this as the beginning of individuation, the confrontation with the unconscious material that demands acknowledgement. Without solitude, these voices are often drowned out. With solitude, they echo powerfully, and the task is to face them rather than flee. Solitude is also a mirror for shadow work, the process of confronting the parts of the self that have been denied. In relationships, it is easy to project the shadow onto the partner, to blame or idealize them rather than recognize what is within. But in solitude, projection has nowhere to hide. The frustrations, fears, and insecurities that arise must be owned rather than displaced. A woman living alone may come face to face with her own anger, loneliness, or feelings of inadequacy, and these can no longer be attributed to anyone else. This confrontation is painful but transformative, for it forces a reconciliation with the disowned parts of the psyche. To live alone is to enter into dialogue with one's shadow, and through this dialogue, the possibility of integration and healing becomes real. Beyond shadow work, solitude nurtures creativity. Jung believed that the unconscious seeks expression, and when space is given, it emerges in symbolic forms: art, writing, music, dreams, and imagination. Women who live alone often discover creative capacities that had been stifled by the demands of partnership or caretaking. Freed from the need to shape their energy around another, they redirect it inward and outward in new forms of expression. The solitude that once felt empty becomes fertile ground for imagination, innovation, and self-discovery. Creativity in this sense is not only artistic but existential. It is the act of creating a life that is authentically one's own. built not on the expectations of tradition but on the deep truth of the self. Solitude also deepens the spiritual dimension of individuation. Throughout history, mystics, philosophers, and seekers have retreated into solitude to find the divine within. For a woman living alone, solitude can become a spiritual practice, even if not consciously framed that way. The silence, the lack of distraction, the space for contemplation, all of these create conditions where the sacred dimension of life can be experienced more vividly. Jung spoke of the self as both a psychological and a spiritual reality, the image of wholeness that connects the individual not only to her personal unconscious but also to the collective and to the divine. In solitude, this connection becomes clearer, and the woman discovers that she is not alone but accompanied by the deeper presence of the psyche and the greater mystery of existence. Society often fears the solitary woman, labeling her as lonely, incomplete, or abnormal. These judgments are projections of the collective unconscious, which resists what it does not understand. A woman who chooses solitude challenges the archetypal narrative that a woman's fulfillment lies only in partnership. She embodies instead the archetype of the wise woman, the mystic, the independent figures who live beyond the conventional roles and who embody a deeper truth. By stepping outside the expected scripts, she exposes society's discomfort with autonomy, especially feminine autonomy. But in doing so, she also opens the way for others to reimagine what wholeness can look like. The psychological strength gained through solitude cannot be overstated. When a woman learns to be at home with herself, to face her own inner world without fear, she becomes resilient in ways that external validation cannot provide. She no longer seeks constant reassurance, because she has built a foundation of self-knowledge and self-acceptance. This resilience does not mean isolation but rather the capacity to engage with others from a place of wholeness rather than dependency. Relationships, if they come, are chosen freely and enriched by her authenticity, but they are no longer necessary for her sense of completeness. This is the essence of individuation, the ability to live fully as oneself, connected to others but not defined by them. Solitude also transforms the experience of time. Without the constant negotiation of another's needs, time becomes her own, and in that ownership, new rhythms emerge. She may notice the natural cycles of her energy, the patterns of her thoughts, the flow of her emotions in ways that were previously obscured. Time in solitude becomes a canvas for self-discovery rather than a schedule dictated by external demands. This shift allows for deeper self-awareness and a more intimate relationship with life itself. It is in these quiet, unstructured moments that the psyche often reveals its wisdom, offering insights and revelations that shape the path of individuation. Ultimately, solitude becomes not a punishment or a lack but a gift, a space where individuation is not only possible but invited. It provides the container for integration, for the meeting of shadow and light, for the emergence of creativity and spirituality, for the discovery of resilience and authenticity. A woman who embraces solitude steps into a journey of becoming that is rarely easy but profoundly transformative. She learns that to be alone is not to be incomplete but to stand at the threshold of wholeness, where the true work of the self can unfold in its fullness. The archetypal projections society places on single women are among the most revealing insights into how the collective unconscious shapes perception, judgment, and the treatment of individuals who choose a path outside conventional roles. Jung taught that archetypes are universal patterns, timeless images embedded in the collective psyche, and these archetypes are constantly projected onto people, especially onto those who challenge or deviate from social expectations. Women who live alone without a man often become the canvas for these projections, carrying not only their own individuality but also the weight of collective fears, desires, and myths. The world does not see only the woman herself, it sees what she represents in the unconscious. She becomes, in the eyes of others, a symbol of independence, of danger, of mystery, of incompleteness, depending on the archetype activated in the observer. Understanding these projections is essential, because they reveal not only how society perceives the solitary woman but also what the collective unconscious fears and longs for. One of the most enduring archetypal projections cast upon women who live alone is that of the witch or the sorcerer. This image, deeply rooted in myth and history, portrays the solitary woman as threatening, dangerous, or unnatural. In many cultures, women living outside the protection or authority of men were viewed with suspicion, accused of witchcraft, or feared as sources of chaos. This projection reflects society's unconscious fear of female autonomy, of the power that emerges when a woman is not bound by traditional roles. The archetype of the witch embodies not only fear but fascination, because she is seen as possessing knowledge and freedom that others do not. Even in the modern era, echoes of this projection persist. Independent women are often labeled as intimidating, unapproachable, or too much, as though their refusal to conform is somehow threatening to the established order. Another archetype projected onto solitary women is that of the spinster or the old maid, which embodies the collective narrative of incompleteness. This projection reduces a woman's value to her relationship with a man, implying that to live without one is to have failed at her essential role. Such labeling reveals the collective unconscious assumption that fulfillment for women is found only through partnership and family. Yet beneath this judgment lies a deeper cultural anxiety, the fear that a woman can create a meaningful, whole life without dependence on a man. This archetype is not a reflection of the woman's reality but of society's insecurity about its own prescribed roles. By projecting the image of incompleteness onto her, the collective protects itself from questioning whether its values are too narrow or limiting. The archetype of the temptress or seductress is another projection that often attaches itself to women living alone. In this narrative, the solitary woman becomes an object of suspicion, imagined as dangerous to the stability of families and relationships, a figure who threatens to lure men away. This projection is especially revealing because it exposes the collective's difficulty in conceiving of a woman's independence without placing it in relation to men. Rather than seeing her solitude as a personal choice, society interprets it through the lens of sexuality and temptation. This reflects not only projections of fear but also projections of desire. As the solitary woman becomes a screen for the fantasies and anxieties of others, the temptress archetype says less about her than it does about the unacknowledged struggles of those who perceive her this way, revealing the collective's conflicted relationship with desire, autonomy, and control. On the other side of these shadowed projections lies the archetype of the wise woman or the sage, which represents society's recognition, however unconscious, of the depth and power solitude can bring. In myth and folklore, the solitary woman is sometimes the healer, the seer, or the keeper of hidden wisdom, living apart from the collective yet serving it through her insight. This projection emerges when others unconsciously sense that the woman who has chosen solitude has touched something beyond conventional life, something that grants her a perspective unavailable to those bound by tradition. While this archetype is more positive than the witch or the spinster, it is still a projection. It idealizes the solitary woman, turning her into a symbol of wisdom rather than seeing her as a complex individual. Yet it also reveals the collective, unconscious recognition that solitude can cultivate, qualities society secretly admires but does not always allow itself to pursue. These archetypal projections are not random. They arise from the deeper currents of the collective psyche, shaped by centuries of myth, religion, and cultural conditioning. In patriarchal systems especially, the woman who lives without a man destabilizes the established archetypal order. She no longer fits neatly into the roles of wife, mother, or daughter, and thus the psyche of the collective must place her into other categories that it can understand. By projecting archetypes like witch, spinster, temptress, or wise woman onto her, society attempts to contain the disruption her autonomy represents. In doing so, it reveals its own unconscious fears about freedom, wholeness, and the breakdown of traditional roles. The weight of these projections can have profound effects on the woman herself. Jung observed that individuals often internalize projections, carrying the burden of images that are not truly theirs. A solitary woman may internalize the archetype of incompleteness, feeling unworthy or inadequate even if she consciously values her independence. She may feel the tension of being perceived as threatening or undesirable, which can create conflict between her authentic self and the roles others impose upon her. Alternatively, she may unconsciously embrace a projected archetype, identifying with the witch or the wise woman as though it were her essence, rather than recognizing it as an image shaped by the collective unconscious. Individuation requires disentangling oneself from these projections, recognizing them for what they are, and reclaiming the authentic self beneath them. At the same time, these projections also reveal opportunities. When society projects archetypes onto the solitary woman, it unwittingly acknowledges her symbolic significance. She becomes not only an individual but also a mirror for collective anxieties and aspirations. This symbolic position allows her, if she is conscious of it, to act as a vessel for transformation. By confronting and integrating the projections placed upon her, she does the work not only of her own individuation but also of helping the collective confront its shadow. The solitary woman, in this sense, becomes a figure of potential cultural renewal, exposing the limitations of old narratives and pointing toward new possibilities of wholeness and freedom. The archetypal projections society places on women who live alone are not simply judgments but psychological revelations. They expose the collective's discomfort with autonomy, its fear of incompleteness, its struggle with desire, and its hidden admiration for wisdom. Each projection tells a story about the unconscious, about what has been denied or exaggerated. In the cultural psyche, to read these projections is to see not only how society views solitary women, but also what it fears and desires within itself. The solitary woman becomes a canvas for archetypal drama, carrying the weight of symbols that reveal far more about the collective unconscious than about her personal reality. For Jung, the task of individuation is to withdraw these projections, to strip away the archetypal images imposed by others, and to discover the wholeness of the self beneath them. For the solitary woman, this task is both burden and gift. Burden because of the projections she must bear, and gift because in bearing them she stands at the threshold of deeper truth, both for herself and for the collective to which she belongs. The shadow work that emerges in the silence of independence is one of the most profound yet challenging aspects of solitude, especially for women who live alone without the presence of a partner to mirror their unconscious material. Jung explained that the shadow consists of all those qualities, impulses, and desires that the conscious mind rejects, suppresses, or denies, often because they conflict with social norms, cultural conditioning, or personal ideals. The shadow is not inherently negative. It contains both destructive and life-giving energies, but it remains hidden in the unconscious until circumstances bring it forward. When a woman chooses or finds herself living alone, the silence and space of independence create the perfect environment for the shadow to rise, because there are fewer distractions, fewer external roles to play, and fewer opportunities to project these hidden aspects onto a partner. In solitude, the shadow comes closer, demanding to be acknowledged, and this confrontation, while often uncomfortable, is also the gateway to profound growth and individuation. In relationships. Projection is a common way of dealing with the shadow. A woman might project her denied anger onto a partner, accusing him of being the aggressive one, or she may project her unacknowledged ambitions onto him, admiring or resenting his drive while neglecting her own. The presence of another person provides an outlet for the shadow to be displaced. But when she lives alone, these projections lose their target, and the shadow has no place to hide. Feelings of anger, envy, loneliness, or longing emerge directly, and she must face the truth that these belong not to anyone else but to herself. This confrontation can be difficult because it challenges the self-image constructed by the persona, the mask worn to meet the expectations of society. It is in this difficulty that real shadow work begins. The silence of independence intensifies this process. Without constant conversation or interaction to fill the air, thoughts and feelings arise with greater clarity. Memories from the past resurface, sometimes accompanied by unresolved emotions. Old wounds, long buried beneath the busyness of relationships or caretaking, begin to ache again, asking for attention. The unconscious uses silence as a canvas upon which it projects its images, and dreams in particular often become more vivid during periods of solitude. Night after night, the psyche presents symbolic material that points toward shadow integration. For a woman living alone, paying attention to these dreams and the emotions they stir can become a profound practice of self-discovery. Shadow work in independence often reveals itself first as discomfort. A woman may feel restless, anxious, or even haunted by her own company. She may turn to distractions, endless scrolling, constant noise, overwork in order to avoid sitting with herself. Yet these very discomforts are signals that something within is seeking recognition. Loneliness, for example, is not simply the absence of others. It can also be the presence of the unloved parts of oneself, the aspects that have been abandoned. Internally, anger that arises in solitude may not be about external circumstances at all, but about the years of silence, compliance, or suppression that were endured. Each of these feelings, though painful, carries within it the energy of transformation, because by facing them consciously, they can be integrated into a fuller, richer sense of self. One of the most important aspects of shadow work in solitude is the confrontation with one's own needs and desires. In relationships, especially traditional ones. Women are often conditioned to prioritize the needs of others, sometimes to the point of losing touch with their own. When living alone, those needs can no longer be dismissed or externalized. They become impossible to ignore. A woman may realize that she longs for freedom, for expression, for creativity, for intimacy, or even for power, and these realizations may clash with the roles she was taught to accept. By recognizing and honoring these desires, she begins to reclaim parts of herself that had been relegated to the shadow. This reclamation is not an act of selfishness, but of wholeness. For individuation requires the integration of all aspects of the psyche, including those that society discourages. Shadow work in solitude also involves facing fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of inadequacy. These often surface when there is no one else to provide reassurance. Alone, a woman encounters the voices of doubt that whisper from the unconscious. You are not enough. You will be forgotten. You cannot survive without others. These voices are not truths but archetypal echoes of collective fears, and they emerge in solitude precisely so they can be confronted. By bringing them into consciousness, she gains the opportunity to challenge them, to see where they come from, and to choose differently. Each time she faces fear and continues forward, she integrates another piece of the shadow and strengthens her inner resilience. Creativity is often born from this shadow work. The emotions and energies uncovered in solitude can be channeled into art, writing, music, or other forms of expression. What was once repressed becomes raw material for creation, and in transforming it, the woman not only integrates her shadow, but also discovers new dimensions of herself. Jung saw creativity as a vital outlet for the unconscious, a way for symbols and archetypes to find expression in the outer world. For women living alone, the freedom to create without interruption, without judgment, and without the need to conform to another's expectations can be profoundly healing. In this sense, solitude is not only the space where the shadow is revealed, but also the workshop, where its energy is transformed into new life. The archetypal dimension of shadow work in independence is equally important. A solitary woman may find herself embodying figures from myth and story: the hermit, the witch, the wise woman, archetypes that represent both fear and wisdom. These archetypal identities emerge because solitude connects her to deeper layers of the psyche, where collective symbols dwell. At first, she may feel the weight of society's projections, the fear of being seen as lonely, strange, or incomplete. But as she continues her shadow work, she may begin to embrace the archetypal energy of the solitary seeker, recognizing herself as part of a lineage of individuals who found transformation in independence. This recognition provides meaning to her solitude, framing it not as exile but as initiation into deeper truths. Shadow work is rarely comfortable, and in solitude it can feel relentless. Yet it is also in solitude that the greatest breakthroughs occur. By sitting with emotions rather than fleeing from them, by facing fears rather than denying them, by reclaiming denied desires and integrating them into consciousness, a woman begins to move toward wholeness. The shadow is no longer an enemy lurking in the unconscious, but a companion on the path of individuation, guiding her toward authenticity. Independence creates the silence in which this dialogue can take place, and while it may feel like a burden at times, it is in fact the gift of solitude. As shadow work progresses, the woman who lives alone begins to notice changes in her presence and energy. She becomes less reactive, less dependent on external validation, and more grounded in her own truth. The qualities she once projected onto others, strength, confidence, creativity, become visible within herself. She may still experience fear or doubt, but she no longer runs from them. She incorporates them into her growing sense of wholeness. Jung describes this process as the integration of opposites, where light and dark, conscious and unconscious, come together to form the self. In solitude, this integration becomes possible, in ways that are often obscured by the constant demands of relationship. Shadow work in the silence of independence is not about perfection but about honesty. It requires acknowledging what has been denied, reclaiming what has been abandoned, and integrating what has been projected. For women who live alone, this process is both the challenge and the gift of independence. It is the inner labor that transforms solitude from emptiness into fullness, from isolation into individuation. The silence that once felt unbearable becomes the very medium through which the shadow speaks, and in listening, a woman discovers depths of strength, creativity, and authenticity she may never have known otherwise. Freedom, creativity, and self-realization found beyond traditional roles represent one of the most powerful outcomes of solitude. especially for women who choose to live alone without a man. Jung understood that cultural expectations and social archetypes often dictate the roles that women are expected to inhabit, roles such as wife, mother, caretaker, or companion. While these roles can carry meaning, they are not the entirety of a woman's psyche. When a woman is not bound by them, when she lives outside of these prescribed identities, she has the opportunity to discover dimensions of herself that may have been long suppressed. Beyond traditional roles lies a vast landscape of freedom, the freedom to shape life according to one's own inner truth rather than the dictates of external approval. This freedom creates the conditions for creativity to flourish, for authentic self-realization to unfold, and for a woman to embody wholeness on her own terms. Freedom, in this sense, is not simply the absence of constraints, but the presence of possibility. When a woman lives alone, her choices are no longer constantly filtered through the needs and expectations of a partner. She decides what her days look like, how her energy is spent, what goals she pursues, and what rhythms she follows. This autonomy can feel daunting at first, especially if she has been conditioned to prioritize others above herself, but over time it becomes liberating. Freedom allows her to hear her own inner voice without it being drowned out by external demands. It allows her to experiment, to fail, to succeed, and to redefine herself continuously. This is the freedom that individuation requires, the space to align conscious choices with the deeper call of the self rather than with societal scripts. Creativity arises naturally from this freedom, because the psyche always seeks expression. When given room to breathe, Jung described creativity as the voice of the unconscious, a symbolic expression of the forces within that demand recognition. When a woman is no longer confined to traditional roles, the energy once consumed by conformity is released into creative channels. She may begin to write, paint, build, or explore new fields of knowledge. She may express creativity not only in art but in the very design of her life, choosing to travel, to start a business, to cultivate a garden, or to immerse herself in spiritual practice. The important point is that creativity in solitude is not directed toward fulfilling another's expectation but toward honoring her own inner truth. This act of creation is itself an expression of individuation, a way of giving shape to the psyche's emerging wholeness. Traditional roles often limit creativity because they emphasize repetition and maintenance, caring for others, keeping order, sustaining routine. While these tasks can carry meaning, they often leave little room for exploration or innovation. In solitude, the woman is free to disrupt routines, to play with possibilities, to allow intuition and imagination to guide her. The archetype of the creator, long suppressed in many women by cultural conditioning, finds space to come alive. She may discover talents she never knew she had or resurrect dreams that were abandoned long ago. The silence and space of living alone act like a blank canvas, inviting her to paint her own vision of life without apology. Self-realization is the deepest fruit of this process, for freedom and creativity ultimately point toward the discovery of the self. Jung described the self as the archetype of wholeness, the totality of conscious and unconscious elements within the psyche. Traditional roles often bind women to the persona, the mask worn to meet societal expectations. A woman may appear to be the perfect wife or mother while feeling alienated from her deeper truth. Living beyond those roles strips away the mask, and forces her to ask, who am I apart from what society tells me I should be? The answer to this question unfolds gradually through experiences of freedom and acts of creation. Each time she chooses according to her own truth, each time she expresses something original, she takes a step closer to self-realization. This process often involves reclaiming qualities that were denied in the past. Many women are taught to suppress ambition, assertiveness, or independence, associating these traits with masculinity or selfishness. Yet, in solitude, she can recognize that these qualities are not alien but part of her own psyche, necessary for wholeness. Similarly, she may rediscover softness, playfulness, or sensuality that was repressed under the weight of responsibility. Freedom beyond traditional roles allows her to integrate these disowned aspects, weaving them into a fuller picture of herself. Self-realization is not about rejecting femininity or tradition altogether, but about moving beyond one's definitions, embracing the full spectrum of her humanity. Living without the constraints of traditional roles also changes her relationship with time and space. She is no longer bound to the cycles dictated by partnership or family, but can instead attune to her own natural rhythms. She may discover that her energy peaks at certain times of day, that solitude renews her creativity, or that she thrives in environments she had never explored before. These discoveries deepen her connection with herself and allow her to live more authentically. Time becomes her ally rather than her master, and life feels more like an unfolding journey than a series of obligations. This reorientation toward time and space is itself a form of self-realization, a recognition that her life belongs to her. There is also a spiritual dimension to this freedom. Traditional roles often link women's value to service and sacrifice. But in solitude, a woman may discover that she can serve the world best by being true to herself. Spiritual practices, whether prayer, meditation, contemplation, or simply mindful presence, take on new depth when pursued in solitude. Without distraction, she can listen more deeply to the inner voice that connects her to the divine. Jung would argue that this inner voice is the self, the image of God within the psyche. By following it, she not only realizes her individuality, but also participates in the greater mystery of existence. Self-realization, then, is not a solitary achievement, but a reconnection with the archetypal and the divine. Freedom beyond traditional roles also reshapes relationships. Even when she lives without a partner, by realizing herself, she can form friendships, communities, or partnerships that are based not on dependency or social expectation but on authenticity. Relationships become choices rather than necessities. She does not seek others to fill a void but to share the fullness she has discovered within herself. This shift transforms the quality of connection, creating bonds that are deeper, freer, and more resilient. It also challenges the cultural narrative that a woman must be attached to a man to be complete, offering instead a model of wholeness that is grounded in self-knowledge and autonomy. The archetypal resonance of this journey is profound. A woman who finds freedom, creativity, and self-realization beyond traditional roles embodies archetypes such as the explorer, the creator, or the wise woman. She carries within her the energy of those who journeyed into unknown territory to discover new truths. Her life becomes symbolic, not only for herself but for others who see in her a mirror of possibility. She challenges the collective unconscious to expand its definitions of femininity and wholeness, showing that true fulfillment is not limited to prescribed roles but can be discovered in the authentic unfolding of the self. This journey is not without challenges. Freedom can bring loneliness, creativity can stir fear of failure, and self-realization often demands the painful shedding of old identities. Yet each challenge is also a passage, a threshold into deeper authenticity. Jung emphasized that individuation always involves tension, for it requires holding opposites, the desire for belonging and the need for independence, the pull of tradition and the call of the new, the comfort of roles and the uncertainty of freedom. In solitude, these tensions are intensified, but they are also the crucible in which wholeness is forged. By enduring them, a woman discovers that she is not defined by roles but by the living depth of her psyche, which continually grows, transforms, and creates freedom. Creativity and self-realization beyond traditional roles are not merely psychological states but lived realities that transform how a woman inhabits the world. They allow her to claim her own life as her own creation, to embody wholeness on her own terms, and to contribute to the collective by expanding the possibilities of what it means to be human. In choosing a life outside the expected path, she discovers a truth that resonates far beyond herself, that individuation, the journey into authenticity, is the ultimate fulfillment, and solitude provides one of its most powerful gateways.